So, my name's Anne Caress. Apologies that you're not getting Tina Lavender, and for those of you who were excited to meet and speak to Tina, I hope you're not going to be too disappointed. I'm hoping today that we're going to be able to have an interesting presentation. I hope you'll find it interesting, and maybe some questions and discussion at the end. So, let's start off thinking about this. That's my research journey, starting off from a wee little student nurse back in the 1980s, back when dinosaurs still roamed the earth and Florence Nightingale was practising, right the way up to the present day. And the eagle-eyed amongst you there will see I've got some of my career highlights, I've also got some of my personal highlights. The very eagle-eyed amongst you, at the top corner there under our 25th anniversary, that was a zombie experience day that we actually went on. It was an absolute hoot. So, yeah. In reality, though, of course, my research career looks a bit more like that. So what I'm going to try and do today is to talk you through how you can have more ladders and fewer snakes. And given that we recognise that you're never going to be able to completely avoid the snakes, think about how you can actually charm them. So back when I was a wee little lass, there was this wacky programme on the television called Monkey, or Monkey Magic. Anybody remember Monkey? Yeah, oh, fantastic, fantastic. Are you all fessing up to how old you all are then? For those of you who don't know Monkey or are too young to remember it, Monkey was a Japanese retelling of an ancient Chinese legend, which is about the Monkey King, who's this chap here in the middle with the band on his head, who went on a journey to collect some sacred skulls. And he was accompanied by Tripitaka, who was a very holy but rather naive monk, and two former marshals of heaven who were disgraced and booted out and turned into demons. And one was Pigsy, he's the guy with the rake, and the other one was Sandy, he's a water demon. And they both had to earn their passage back up to heaven through accompanying them on this journey. And it was bonkers. It was this completely bonkers series. However, what Monkey's story is really about, Monkey essentially represents humanity. And what Monkey's story really is about, and what Monkey's journey really is about, is a journey of enlightenment. And I think that is a fantastic analogue for what it's about to undertake research and what it's about to be a researcher. So I'm going to use that as my motif throughout this presentation. I'm going to use Monkey. I had enormous fun finding all these pictures on the internet, I have to say. I've probably broken every copyright law known to mortal man, but never mind. My own research journey began back in 1988, working with Professor Karen Luca, with whom I've worked. It's scary. I've worked with Karen one way and another longer than I've been married, and I've been married 25 years. But she was, up until just recently, the head of school at the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Social Work. And when I knew her first, she actually was a senior lecturer in the school. And this was her first project as a principal investigator. So actually, it was a really interesting scenario. It was kind of her first PI project. It was my first ever experience as a researcher. And it was developing computer-assisted learning for people on continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, or CAPD. Back in the days, bear in mind, we're talking about the mid-80s, computers had 16 colours, and you measured the computer memory capacity in kilobytes, not terabytes, and you had little floppy disks that you actually had to plug into the computer. So although it kind of seems fairly commonplace now, it was very novel at the time. And I have to say, as an introduction to research, it was the best research gig ever, because I spent 18 months drawing cartoons for a living. It was absolutely brilliant. So that was my kind of introduction to research. And I have to say, when I first was approached about actually applying for that job, I had real reservations about doing it for several reasons. One, I knew Karen. She'd been one of my lecturers when I was an undergrad, and to say that she had a formidable reputation would be something of an understatement. She was known affectionately amongst the students as Scary Karen Luca. So that was a bit, I don't know about this. Two, I was only 18 months qualified. And the accepted wisdom at the time was you had to have gone and done your apprenticeship and done your time and got some experience under your belt before you went and did those things. And it's sad to say that I actually still hear that now from some of our brand new graduates. When I talk to them about research, they'll go, oh yeah, but I can't, or even some of our students, who are coming towards graduation, can't really think about that because actually, I've got to go out there and I've got to be a real nurse for a bit before I go off and do research. And the other reason was because my line manager at the time actually said to me that if I went, and this were her exact words, If you go off and you waste 3 years messing about doing that, when you come back, you won't even be fit to be a D grade, which was the equivalent of a brand new band 5 back then. So with that encouragement from my line manager, I still went ahead and decided to take the post. So perhaps my first message for you all today is you have to have the courage to take that first step. You may encounter scepticism, you may encounter outright hostility. And you know, to be fair to our managerial colleagues, they have to be operationally focused. I'm not being critical. At the end of the day, if research stops in the NHS tomorrow, they've still got to provide a service. So I'm not being critical. But you know, you do sometimes have to just be a bit brave, and it is going to be different, and it is going to be a whole new thing to do. You've just got to be brave and do it. During that first project, I got my first experience of writing for publication. So I got 3 papers out of that project. And this paper that you see, the one that's large, Rethinking Patient Education, was my very first ever publication. And I have to say, still in a lot of ways my favourite. And it's still quoted. That's scary. 1989, you still see it quoted. Having said that, it took me 6 attempts, 6 drafts, to get it to a point where Karen Luca was happy to submit it. And it then took another 12 months before the journal finally was happy with it, and we actually got it published and in print. So here's my second lesson for you. 1, as a researcher, you have to just learn to be persistent and keep going and battling no matter what the odds. And 2, you have to develop hide like a rhino. You will get more knockbacks than you will get successes. Obviously, as you progress in your research career, you do start to get more success. As with all these things, money generates money and success generates success. But even, you know, the best of us, we get knockbacks. I mean, I was talking to a colleague the other day, Professor Charles McCullum, who's incredibly eminent in vascular surgery. You know, and he was saying he still probably has about a 1 in 2 hit rate with his grant applications. He still gets papers knocked back. You know, so you do just have to get tough. And it's one of the things I've found in my joint appointment is nurses, midwives, AHPs often get disheartened very easily. You know, they come along, they do a draft, it gets knocked back, and I never see it again. So, you know, just develop a rhino hide. The other thing I learned on that project was the absolute critical value of patient and public involvement. I was very lucky. I was doing patient and public involvement back before they called it that. And I was lucky because my first project, as I say, was computer-assisted learning. So I was working with computer scientists, software engineers, and it's just routine for them. It's normal. They would discuss specs with their customers. They would actually beta test things with the intended end users. They will actually get client feedback on whether the program or whatever it is they've produced, the package, actually does what the end user wants it to do. So I kind of just thought, oh, that's how you do it then, is it? And grew up with that as an idea. And actually, it has shaped my research career, and I'll come back to it later at the end of the presentation, because I think it is critically important. So that began my research journey, and it began what for me has been a lifelong passion for understanding, helping, supporting patients and their family carers in living with and management of long-term conditions. I was fortunate enough then to apply for and get a studentship from the Department of Health. The equivalent of that programme now is the Integrated Clinical Academic Careers Programme for nurses, midwives and allied health professions and clinician scientists. It's been opened up a bit now. Anybody know about that programme? Anybody applied for that programme? Yeah, there's a few people, okay? If you don't know about it, go and have a look. These are fully funded opportunities. You're going to hear about the internships later on today, aren't you? I think after my presentation, which are a new pre-masters level. They fund masters, they fund PhDs, they fund postdocs. They're fully funded at salary. And I have to say, having that opportunity to have 3 years full-time with you know, at my salary, I was relatively new when I went into research, but still the stipends that were offered on things like the MRC awards, I just couldn't have afforded to do that. And you know, that's the big problem for many health professionals, that they just couldn't afford to lose their salary. They couldn't afford to resign their job. You know, if you're a band 7 or an 8A or whatever it is, you don't want to lose that security. You retain your job security, you're paid at salary. Fantastic opportunity. We are so lucky to have these. My PhD built on the work of a very eminent Canadian nurse researcher, Leslie Degner, who again has been a fantastic guide, mentor and supporter of me over the years. And Leslie's work looked at treatment decision making and information needs in breast cancer. And what I did was I took that in a sideways move and I applied it to the renal field. And that again is another message for you. One of the things you need to learn to be as a researcher is to be a bit creative and a bit lateral. So, you need to actually look at something and think, oh, actually, we could probably do that. We could adapt that. We could use that. That's quite important. There are very few actually original ideas out there. Most of the time what we're doing is adding a Lego brick to the Great Wall of China of research. Yeah? We are incrementally building knowledge. That actually is one of the things that hits you about year 2 of your PhD, because you're out there thinking, whoa, I'm doing a PhD, I'm so important and I'm going to change the world. And then about year 2, you kind of realise that actually my contribution to knowledge is about that big, but it's still a novel contribution to knowledge. And so, celebrate it for that. And what then happened was, from there, a whole programme of research has developed over the years. I've used this image. Within the monkey legend, there is a stone egg, and the stone egg is thought. And from thought, and the saying that goes with it is, with our thoughts we rule the world. Isn't that a wonderful saying? And from the stone egg came monkey. And the nature of monkey was, can anyone remember? Irrepressible. Yeah? But the other quote is, divine roots conceives and the spring breaks forth. That's Wu Cheng'en, who was a Chinese author who collected and wrote down the monkey legends. And that, again, I think is a fantastic analogue for what research is about. That actually an idea takes root and it's about, the spring does break forth. Once you actually get started on programmes of research, they do just grow like topsy. So I'll very quickly whip through. These are projects I've been doing over the last probably 10, 15 years, some of which I've been a principal investigator on, some of which I've been a co-collaborator, co-investigator on, some of which I've had the privilege, Helen's here, one of my former PhD students. Give them a wave, Helen. Yeah. I've been the privilege of being the supervisor on, and that, of course, as you become more senior in your career, is one of the pleasures of becoming a senior researcher, is that you actually move from being the grunt who runs around doing all the data collection to the person who has the grunts running around doing the data collection. But being serious, you actually go from being the sort of the person doing the work to the person supervising the work and supporting and mentoring others. So here we go, other respiratory conditions, other conditions. I'll come back to that later, actually, about this issue of building a programme of research and about the breadth or not breadth of that. And, of course, if you stand still long enough, you end up back where you started. So I've recently gone back into the renal field. I've actually been doing renal projects again. So it all looks, doesn't it, as though, wow, this is just so easy, isn't it? It's just kind of, you start off, you get a project, and it all kind of just happens. So what I want to do now is just demonstrate that it isn't actually always all that simple. And I'm going to use a project I undertook. It was actually very kindly funded by GlaxoSmithKline's Global Health Outcomes Division. And it was a 2-phase study with people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So I've had CAPD, and then I moved on to COPD. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it was looking at their symptom perceptions, information needs and role preferences. So although it's quite a long way down my career, it was again building on what I started on. First phase was qualitative, so we actually undertook interviews with 60 patients, and on the basis of that, we developed and did some preliminary testing of some questionnaires, all of which are based on what are called paired comparisons approaches. There are a number of these. I mean, these names will mean nothing to you if you've not come across them, but there are things like Thurstone scaling, Coombs unfolding theory, and conjoint analysis. And the underpinning principle of them all is that when people make choices and make decisions, they're not usually simple unidimensional decisions. So conjoint analysis, for example, it comes from the world of marketing, and its underpinning principle is if somebody's choosing a washing machine or a car or whatever, they will weigh up the price versus the colour versus the performance versus the eco-friendliness. And each of those will have a different weighting in their decision. And so what you do is you develop scenarios that combine all the potential options, or a number of the potential options, in slightly different ways. And you get a much more refined and subtle understanding of people's choices. Thurstone scaling is actually about ranking, as is Coombs unfolding theory. They just do things in a different way. They're about ranking. And again, when people rank order things, yes, they will rank them top to bottom, but there will be subtleties of difference in there. So a rank order of 1 to 10 may really be, well, I like 1 and I don't really care about all the rest. Or I like 1 and 2, but beyond that, they could really be in any order you like. So Thurstone scaling, Coombs unfolding theory allow you to pick those things out. Okay, so that's kind of all you need to know about them, really. And they have been used, so that the roots are in things like psychology and market research. They're used a lot in market research, CJA in particular. But they have been quite widely applied in health and social care research and are increasingly done so. And they have been used in breast cancer. I'd use them in asthma. I'd use them in lung cancer. Some colleagues had used them in people with prostate cancer. So they'd been used in populations that would be reasonably comparable, either in terms of being respiratory conditions or in terms of the demographic of the patient populations, and been used quite successfully. So, okay, we think COPD, give it a go, not going to be a problem. So here we go. So we identified these. The patients told us that these were their main symptoms. Most of them are things that are probably unsurprising. 2 that were, at the time, fairly novel were this nocturnal waking and tiredness that people hadn't really given any attention to. The others were quite well reported in the literature. So on the basis of that, we developed these conjoint analysis scenarios where you put in the different items. And if you look there are subtle differences between day A and day D. And the person's asked to choose between them. It's quite cognitively demanding, as you can imagine, especially when you're presented with maybe 20 scenarios like that, and you've got to make a choice on each scenario. Core information needs, these were the information needs. So again, they're not in priority order, they were just the topics that came up most frequently in the thematic analysis of the qualitative data. So what you do with Thurstone scaling is every possible pairing of those items, unique pairing, so every item gets paired up with every item, okay? And the person makes a choice between each of those items. If you've got 9 items, it's 36 unique pairs. The more items you've got, the more it goes up. So 36 pairs. After the first page, though, the items start reappearing. It's just the pairings that are different. So again, it's fairly cognitively demanding, because people sit there and think, did I see that already? Have I made that choice already? Okay? And in the Coombs unfolding theory, what you do is you present people with a series of choices. In this case, they're vignettes about their preferences for involvement in treatment decisions. And in this case, they run from being completely active to completely passive. You present them in pairs, so every possible pairing, and at the end of it, you will have a rank order, but you'll also be able to look at whether there are patterns within there. So, for example, have you got a scenario where people are happy with any of the sort of middle ground but reject the ends? Or have you got somebody who is completely in the active direction or completely in the passive direction? Okay? But again, it requires a bit of cognitive load for the person to sort of make these choices. And what we actually found was people with COPD just couldn't manage the cognitive load. So we'd gone out, we'd done the qualitative interviewing. I developed the questionnaires with a patient and public involvement group, with a lay group. We'd had a lay member on the team. We thought Thunderbirds would go. We took them out and we actually took them to patients. Those with moderate to severe disease in particular just couldn't do them. They just couldn't manage the task. So, as a researcher, what did I do? Did I think, oh dear, and just give up and walk away? No, of course I didn't, because I'm a researcher and I've got this tough hide and I've kind of learnt that you have to just, roll with the blows and carry on. What actually we did was we thought, well, hang on a minute, what is going on here? Why is it that these patients, other groups of patients who are a similar age, similar social background, other patients with respiratory conditions that could do this? What is it about people with COPD that means they can't do this? Is there something going on cognitively? And I did two things. I went away and I looked in the literature to see whether anyone else had had this issue. And sure as eggs is eggs, there is some literature that suggests that people with COPD do experience cognitive impairment more commonly than the general population. I then went to the patient public involvement group, which is actually a patient support group that I've worked with very closely over the last 10 years, and said to them, do you think this is a priority? Is this something that you as people with COPD recognise? Do you think it's something we should look at? Should I try and get some research money for it? And they said resoundingly yes. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One, because quite a few people in the group, either patients or carers, had observed this themselves or observed it in their cared for. And secondly, and I do have his permission to use this picture, and it was given to me at a time when he still had capacity. The chair of the group, which is the gentleman you see in the picture there, who's sadly just been bereaved. It's really sad. His wife's just died. Has developed cognitive impairment. And he's now actually in quite a rapid period. It's usually vascular dementia they develop, so the progress is quite fast, and has gone from being chairing the group and being a lively, outgoing chap to not now being able to sign his own name in probably 2 years. So clearly it was very topical for the group at that time. So okay, I think, right, I'm going to take this forward. I'm on a personal mission now to take this forward. And we're doing two bits of work. One is we're going to actually look at the underlying mechanism. It's assumed to be hypoxemia, but we don't actually know. So we're going to do a bit of work to try and put that to the test. Actually, what we're going to do is a very simple bolt-on to an existing flight challenge testing that's done. And the second is, I'm going to look and see what does that mean for people actually using their inhalers in day-to-day life. Because largely, COPD is self-managed. So people will take inhalers, they will have a rescue pack, often to use, not everybody, but most will have a rescue pack. So if they develop an exacerbation, they've got some standby antibiotics and so on and so forth. But that means that they've got to actually be able to make decisions, they've got to be able to recognise worsening, they've got to know what to do with their medications. And I'm interested to know whether, now clearly once you're at the point where you've got severe cognitive impairment, no big surprise. My suspicion though is, based on what we experience with the questionnaires, even that low level, mild cognitive impairment may well be having a negative impact. But we don't know at this moment in time. Great. Except that when we start to try and do that second project, we discover there isn't actually any meaningful way of measuring how people use their inhalers out there. Not in day-to-day life. You can bring them into a clinic and you can actually assess them and have a nurse complete a checklist. You can ask them to do a self-complete questionnaire or diary with all the sort of response and recording bias that has. You can put a chip in the device which will count the doses. All that does, though, is tell you they took the top off or they actuated the device. Doesn't tell you whether they actually, and patients sometimes do this, dump them all. So, before they're due to see the nurse, they know they've not been taking their inhaler, so they very quickly empty one. Or it doesn't tell you whether they're sticking it in the mouth and actually squirting it on the roof of the mouth. Yeah? Doesn't tell you any of those things. Doesn't tell you whether actually, because it's quite complex actually, particularly with the metered dose inhalers that you see at the top, to coordinate your hands and your breathing and your everything else. So there isn't a gizmo that actually lets you do that. So actually, before we can even start that piece of work, I've got to do another piece of work, which again is building on some work that's been done in Ireland. They've done a prototype. In fact, they've just taken it to market now with one device, the device in the middle there. But as you can see, that's quite a nice, easy device to work with. It's big, it's flat, you can stick something on it. But it's not a very widely used device. So we, being a typically awkward, bloody-minded researcher, I'm going to go for the slightly more challenging devices, but the ones that patients actually use, which are the PMDIs and some of the dry powder inhalers that you see there. So again, this is just to give you an illustration of how sometimes what looks like a complete roadblock actually can spin you off in all sorts of interesting directions. A lot of it's just about being creative and actually kind of enjoying the challenge. So let's think quickly then about some of the other demons that you might face as a researcher. Now, on the journey to the west, Pigsy, the pig spirit, he was a bit of a ladies' man. So they were constantly getting into diversions and scrapes as Pigsy went wandering off trying to seek some pleasurable experience, either find some attractive ladies or go and find some yummy food or whatever. And unfortunately, as researchers, I think we're all a bit prone to that. And there's two ways that can happen. One, as clinicians, there's always distractions. So there's never a good time to take that first step, or very seldom a good time to take that first step. There's always going to be clinical priorities. There's always going to be other things you could be doing. You know, there's always going to be life events. So one of the big things, there is a workshop actually coming up on procrastination, isn't there? So I think that, you know, clearly I'm just not just the only one who thinks this is an issue. But the other thing is, as a researcher, in particular, I think when you make that transition from being a clinician to suddenly managing your own diary and having, you know, the pace is very different and what have you, you can end up procrastinating. You know, we often get PhD students who are experts in daytime telly and so on, you know. So that's one of the things you have to watch out for. Now, of course, ancient China was where the legends, the monkey legends come from, was notorious for its bureaucracy. They invented the civil service. Sadly, I think the modern research governance structures have reinvented ancient China because it is. Has anyone ever completed an IRAS form? Anyone ever been through the IRAS process? Fun, isn't it? Yeah, I had 5 of those on the go, all in 1 week the other month. I was losing the will to live. To be fair, I'm not knocking the process. I am knocking the process, but I'm doing it kindly. Because actually those processes are there to protect the public, to protect you as a researcher and to improve the quality of research. So burdensome though they may be, they are very necessary. But it is a reality that in research there is a tremendous amount of bureaucracy, both in terms of the governance processes to get approvals to undertake the research, in terms of contracting, in terms of HR, all those sorts of things that you'll have to face and that will probably be quite new if you're just starting out in research. What I would say to you is embrace them. You've got to live with them, you can't avoid them. And actually, if you take the time to do these things properly, if you write your research ethics application well and carefully, it's much more likely to get approved first time. You know, if you put in a sloppy, half-baked, poorly proofread application, it's not only is it going to get bounced, but reputationally, that committee's going to go, ooh, not sure about that one. So the next time you go in, you're going to get a seriously hard time. Yeah? So embrace them, do them properly. The second is make sure that you use the help that's available. There is plenty of help available for these things, both from on the RS form itself. They have a helpline. There will be governance people within your own organisation, in the trust R&D department, or if you're in the university, within the university's R&D or governance or whatever your university calls it team. You know, there will be people, there will be contracts teams, there will be business engagement colleagues, there will be media colleagues who can help you with all these things. Yeah, so embrace them, take them seriously, and just learn to roll with it. Now, when Tripitaka first met Monkey, Monkey had been imprisoned by the gods under a mountain for his mischievousness, for his recklessness, but primarily for his rashness and impatience. So they imprisoned him in a mountain to help him learn patience. And that, again, I think is something as researchers we all need to learn. The research process, the speed of the research process can be glacial. There's been a lot of work done in recent years actually to try and speed up not just the processes for actually getting research itself done, but the processes for getting research into practice. They used to say it took about 17 years from first conception to actual use, and they're trying now to get that down, and there's a lot of hard work. Sally Davis, I have to say, Dame Sally Davis, who's the Chief Medical Officer but also the National Research Director, takes enormous credit for this. I mean, she has really driven this really hard. She's got the government to invest in things like the academic health science centres even, and the academic health science networks and the Clarks, which are all about trying to drive that process forward. But it is still the case that the research process is glacial. I'll give you a nice example. I worked on a project with a colleague, Alex Nalasiotis, who's now in Hong Kong. And from conception to development of this intervention, which is an absolutely pucker, wonderful, well-designed, robustly tested intervention for lung cancer symptoms, has taken 8 years. And we're only now at the point where they're doing the definitive trial, so we're probably talking 11 years. Clearly, clinical practice can't wait 11 years. You've got patients coming through the door who need help now. And I know researchers find the glacial pace of research, clinicians find the glacial pace of research incredibly frustrating. And there's not a lot we can do about it. There are things we can do, and there are innovative ways that we can work, but I think it is just one of those things that we have to try and reconcile as best we can. So those are the demons and the obstacles. Let's think about some of the positive things that can actually help you on your research journey and make it a pleasurable experience. Look at Tributaka smiling away there. That's what all we researchers need to be doing. As Monkey travelled on the journey west, he encountered all sorts of strange places in strange landscapes and places he'd never been before. And the world of research can feel a little bit like that. This is the National Institute for Health Research, the NIHR's map of the different stages of research and innovation and the different funding streams that are associated with that, or the different types of activity that are associated with that. And that's just the NIHR. There are lots and lots of other funders out there. There are charitable funders, there are industry funders, there are all sorts of things out there. And getting to grips with that can be quite difficult. But it is important. You know, there's nothing more frustrating as a reviewer than to see somebody putting in an application that they've clearly put a lot of time and effort into that is for totally the wrong stream. The NIHR is actually getting quite slick at that now. Some of their programs, like the HTA program, Health Technology Assessment Program, actually have an assessment, a pre-screen of whether you're in remit, to save you lots and lots. And they're very good, because if you're not, they will direct you actually to a program that's more suitable, which is a huge help. But still, as a researcher, you need to do your homework. You need to work out which funder, which funding stream is the right one for you. And there is help to do that. There's all sorts of help in your own organisations, the R&D team, or as I say, the research governance and whatever they call it in your university team. But the team I would direct you to particularly is the Research Design Services. They've been set up by the NIHR specifically to help particularly novice researchers actually get their head around the processes, largely in respect of NIHR research, but they can help you with other research as well. Now, Monkey actually had the Bodhisattva Guan Yin to guide him, sometimes with a firm hand, as you can see here, on his way. And I think that is critical for us as researchers. Mentorship and guiding and supporting colleagues is absolutely critical. I have an enormous debt to pay to each of those individuals. Jean McFarlane, who was the head of school back when I was a little student, and not just an inspirational role model, but also a personally fantastic supporter. Karen Luca, who, as I say, I've worked with for over 2 decades now and has really helped push and shape and drive my career. Leslie Degner, who is an enormously generous researcher, allowing me to take things that she'd initiated and developed and run with them and then pick them up and work with them independently. And sometimes, of course, that support doesn't come from within your own profession. Those are all nurses. But actually, one of the biggest supporters and mentors in my career has been Professor Ashley Woodcock, who is a medic. That's him there. He's not just medallion man, that's him with his OBE there. But he has been actually a fantastic supporter. So I think, sometimes look outside of your immediate circle for supporters. And for any of you in the room who's more senior, I would say, I think there is nothing more important and no greater privilege than to be in a position where you are mentoring and supporting other people. And it's not an easy thing to do always, because the nature of the research climate is competitive. So, because you're competing for money, you're competing with other people. When I first went forward for promotion to professor, I got knocked back. And 2 bits of feedback that came back. One was that one of which I think I'm going to have engraved on my tomb. I since I became senior lecturer, have really stepped back quite a lot and tend to, allow my colleagues, for example, to be first authors or to present at conferences and what have you. And the feedback that came back was, needs guidance on excessive generosity of spirit. Which I'm going to have that emblazoned on my tombstone. But I think, that is quite challenging because, you need to develop your own career, but at the same time, you do need to be mentoring and supporting others. Monkey didn't make his journey on his own. He had his core team around him, but he also encountered all sorts of folks, some weird and wonderful along the way. And Collaborative working is absolutely critical, and more so, actually, in research. There are very, very few areas of health and social care research where you can really work as a lone wolf anymore. There are a couple, but not many. These are some of the collaborators I've had over the years. Some of them are very senior people, like Euron Vespo, Martin Partridge, Alistair Burns, that Stuart mentioned before. Some of them started, our peers, like Jackie Smith and Kinta Beaver. Alex Smalasiotis, some like Janelle, who some of you may know from the Christie now, she's got a joint appointment like mine there, started off as more junior colleagues who I sort of mentored and supported and are now flying under their own right, you know, so Janelle's got a chair. And some of them are people like Malcolm, our statistician, who you see on the extreme left, it'll be for you, who is a statistician, who is my saviour. Because without him, I can just about add up all the things on, you know, when I run out of fingers and toes, I'm stuck. Monkey is instantly recognisable. Instantly recognisable. If you know about the monkey legend and you've ever seen pictures of Monkey, there are features of Monkey like his staff and the crown and so on and so forth. Everybody knows Monkey. In the Chinese face makeup, it's always the same face makeup they use for Monkey. And that, as a researcher, is actually something that is important. You need to develop an expertise and be known for something. Now, for some people, that's relatively straightforward. For some people, you know, I've got colleagues like, for example, Christy Deaton, who used to be at Manchester, is now at Oxford. She's well known as the cardiac woman. Jackie Smith, that you saw on there before, she's the cough queen. You know, she's the world leading authority on cough. Instantly recognisable. It's a bit more challenging often for us in health and social care research because often our research is more broad-based. And that was the second bit of feedback I got when I went for promotion, first of all, because I describe myself, as you saw, as a person whose expertise is in living with and management of long-term conditions, with particular interest in things like patient involvement, health education, patient and carer needs and experiences. And the feedback that came back was, you said you're an expert in all these things. You can't be. They're not proper subjects. Because, you know, they didn't have an ology at the end of them. And so I think there is something to be said for if your expertise is, like mine, a bit more broad-based, how do you make sure that, although if you look at my projects, you know, they're all in different clinical specialisms, they're different methodologies, they're, you know, completely different fields. I've got some women's health work, I've got some rheumatology work, I've got cancer, I've got respiratory, but actually the unifying themes underneath them are those around patient and carer experience, living with a long-term condition, management of a long-term condition. You've got to be a go-to person for something. So it's about how you learn to shape your CV and your expertise. Now, research can be quite a lonely and isolating business. I think particularly when you're doing a PhD, you know, especially if it's an early experience for you. And it can also be a completely all-consuming business. I realised I needed to sort of sit back and maybe rethink my life when I realised I was doing 16-hour days, 7 days a week and still not keeping up with my emails. And at that point you think, do you know what? I need to take a step back here and actually get a bit of balance. And so that is something I would say is absolutely critical. Keeping some sort of sense of balance in your life. Having outside interests, for me, it's a love of nature, it's ice skating. There's the lady with the long blonde hair is my long-suffering ice skating coach, Lindsay. It's my animals, my beasties, and of course, my long-suffering husband. But I think it is critical that you do have outside support networks and outside interests, because otherwise it can become very all-consuming, especially because you'll be fired up and impassioned about it. And finally, of course, you need someone who is going to mentor and steer you on the right path. And that's not just in terms of personal mentorship. It's in terms of making sure that what you do is actually relevant and going to make a difference. Research isn't your personal private playground, especially, you know, you're using often public money, charitable money, even if it's farmer money. You know, actually somebody somewhere earned that money. You actually have a responsibility to spend that money wisely, to use that money wisely, and to be doing something that is going to make some kind of difference. Maybe not today. You know, as I say, sometimes it takes a long time, especially if you're doing the more sort of blue skies research. But it isn't just about building your own personal empire or, you know, getting the gongs and the recognition or having more grants than the other guy or papers in better journals. Of course, all those things matter, but if actually it's not making any difference to anybody, it's a bit hollow. So keep in mind throughout what you are actually doing health and social care research for and that is for patients, carers, families, your fellow clinicians, the service, the good of the country, all those things. And I come back to something I mentioned at the beginning. Patient and public involvement in research. This is not just patients as participants, this is having patients helping you design studies, prioritise studies, collect data, disseminate data, is absolutely critical in helping you to keep that focus. And I would encourage you, if you've never, anybody been to the Involve website? Know about Involve? If you don't know about Involve, it's a national organisation that's there to help and support you in doing that. Please do look at the Involve website. So I'm going to finish on that note, with a couple of minutes to spare for questions. And hopefully you're now all inspired, recognising that, yes, there will be some challenges and demons in the background, but hopefully you're all inspired to go out and carry on your own research journeys, whether it be making those first steps or whether it be as an established researcher. Thank you very much for your time and attention.